It was an ordinary Sunday afternoon in Austin, Texas. The date, August 11, 2025. Families filled the Target parking lot. The Texas sun was beating down, shoppers loaded groceries into their cars, and children tugged at their parents' sleeves, begging for one last toy or a snack before heading home. Inside the store, employees scanned items at registers, straightened shelves, and prepared for the evening rush. Nobody knew that within minutes, this peaceful scene would erupt into unthinkable horror. At 5:17 p.m., the first reports came in. Witnesses described hearing sharp, popping sounds, like firecrackers, or the crack of wood snapping. For a split second, people weren't sure what they were hearing. Some paused, looking around in confusion. Others instinctively ducked. Then came the screams. Shoppers in the parking lot saw a man, tall and lean, dressed in dark clothing, walking with an eerie calmness. In his hands was a firearm. The man's name, as we would later learn, was Ethan Blaine Nieneker, 32 years old. But in this moment, no one knew who he was. All they knew was that death had come to a place where families were supposed to feel safe. The first bullets tore through the air. Windows shattered, car alarms blared. Parents threw themselves over their children. A woman screamed out for her husband, only to realize he was already down on the asphalt. Inside the store, the echoes carried. People froze, unsure if it was construction noise or something worse. Within seconds, panic spread. Employees shouted, "Active shooter! Active shooter!" as terrified customers bolted toward the back exits. Some ran into stockrooms and hid behind pallets of paper towels. Others locked themselves in bathrooms, clutching their phones as they frantically dialed 911. Among the first to fall was Rosa Martinez Machuca, a hardworking Target employee. Rosa had just started her evening shift. She had clocked in minutes earlier, never realizing it would be the last time. She was only 25 years old. Friends described her as kind, generous, always smiling. In the parking lot sat 65-year-old Adam Chow. He had just buckled his 4-year-old granddaughter, Astrid Fung, into her car seat. They were on their way home from a simple shopping trip. In seconds, their lives were taken. Adam's wife, seated in the passenger side, survived, but her world was shattered forever. Survivors later described the scene as pure chaos. The sounds of gunfire echoed, followed by silence, then more shots. People dove under cars, held their breath, and prayed the shooter wouldn't see them. Inside the store, the fire alarms had gone off. The air was filled with the cries of children, the shouts of employees trying to guide people to safety, and the desperate ringing of phones as loved ones called to check if family members were alive. The shooter continued to fire indiscriminately, before turning his attention to a nearby vehicle. He forced his way in, carjacking a stunned driver, and sped off before police could arrive. By now, dozens of 911 calls had flooded dispatch. Officers raced to the scene. The first squad cars arrived within minutes, red and blue lights flashing across the Target sign. Armed with rifles, they stormed the parking lot, searching for the gunman. What they found instead was devastation. Broken glass littered the asphalt. Groceries lay scattered, milk spilled across the ground, bread trampled underfoot. And in the midst of it all, bodies. What had begun as a normal day in suburban Austin had turned into a massacre. 3 people were dead, one of them a child. Dozens more were traumatized, their lives forever changed. And the shooter? He was already gone, fleeing into the Texas evening, setting off a massive manhunt that would grip the city in fear. But before we get to the chase, we must stay here, in this moment of shock and grief, to understand what was lost, and how an entire community was shaken to its core. Before the chaos, life at the Target in Austin seemed ordinary. The late afternoon sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the rows of parked cars. Parents pushed carts filled with school supplies. Teenagers browsed electronics, comparing prices on headphones. Employees were in the rhythm of their shifts, scanning items, restocking shelves, chatting with familiar customers. For most, it was a day like any other. Rosa Martinez Machuca had arrived early for work. She was known for her reliability, often covering extra shifts when coworkers needed help. Rosa wasn't just an employee, she was a daughter, a sister, and a beloved friend. Coworkers later recalled that she always carried a quiet warmth, the type of person who made even the most stressful day feel lighter. Outside, Adam Chow was buckling his granddaughter Astrid into her car seat. Astrid was just 4 years old, full of energy, laughter, and curiosity. She loved stuffed animals and princess movies, and her grandparents doted on her. For them, this Target run was a simple errand, a normal slice of everyday life. The hum of shopping carts, the murmur of conversations, the beeping of registers, it was a soundtrack of normalcy. No one knew that in mere minutes, that soundtrack would be drowned out by something far darker. In another part of the lot, a man stepped out of his vehicle. He moved with a strange calmness, as though detached from the reality around him. His name, Ethan Blaine Nieneker, 32 years old. At first, no one paid him much attention. To most, he looked like any other customer. But in his possession was a firearm, one he was about to unleash upon unsuspecting strangers. We may never fully know what went through Ethan's mind in those final moments before pulling the trigger. Was it anger? Delusion? Cold calculation? Witnesses later described him as moving with purpose, not with rage, but with an eerie, unsettling stillness. The clock was ticking. At 5:17 p.m., the first cracks of gunfire ripped through the air. Pop, pop, pop. Shoppers froze. Some thought it might be fireworks. But the sound was too sharp, too close. Then came the screams. A woman pushing a stroller dropped to the ground, shielding her baby. A man sprinted for the entrance, shouting, "Shooter! Shooter!" Cars screeched as drivers tried to back out of their spaces, desperate to escape. Inside the store, confusion spread. The sound carried strangely, muffled by walls, but unmistakable. Panic broke out as voices overlapped. "Get down! Where do we go? Somebody call 911. Within seconds, the Target, once a sanctuary of routine shopping, became a battleground of fear. Survivors later described the scene as surreal, like being trapped in a nightmare. Families were separated in the rush to escape. Parents screamed for children who had slipped from their grasp. Employees huddled customers into stockrooms, locking doors, praying they'd hold. Some hid behind checkout counters, peeking through gaps as the chaos unfolded. Others ran through emergency exits, spilling out into the loading dock, sprinting into the Texas heat with no idea where to go, only knowing they had to get away. And still, the shots continued. The first to fall was Rosa Martinez Machuca. She had been near the entrance, helping guide customers out, when she was struck. Co-workers later remembered the bravery in her final moments, how she put others before herself. In the parking lot, Chow had no chance to react. As he leaned into the car to check on Astrid, bullets shattered the window. Adam and his granddaughter were gone in an instant. His wife, sitting beside them, was injured but survived, left with the haunting memory of what she witnessed. Their deaths would become symbols of the randomness, the senselessness, of this act of violence. Within just minutes, lives had been stolen. A worker who came for her shift. A grandfather who came for errands. A little girl who hadn't even begun her life. And yet, the nightmare was far from over. Because while some were running for safety, the shooter had already set his eyes on escape. By the time the first officers reached the Target, the parking lot looked like a war zone. Groceries were scattered across the asphalt, eggs broken, milk seeping into the pavement, children's toys abandoned mid-flight. Shoppers crouched behind vehicles, trembling, some still clutching their carts. Officers shouted for people to get down as they formed a perimeter. Their rifles scanned the lot, expecting at any second for the shooter to appear from behind a car, ready to fire again. But Ethan Nieneker was no longer there. He had already slipped away. What remained was silence, broken only by the sound of sirens, the cries of survivors, and the occasional voice screaming, "Help! Over here!" Paramedics rushed in, kneeling beside victims. Compressing wounds. Checking pulses. The grim reality set in. For Rosa, for Adam, for Astrid, there was nothing they could do. As chaos reigned at the Target, Ethan made his move. He approached a car stopped at the edge of the lot. The driver, frozen in shock, was dragged from the vehicle as Ethan forced his way in. Within seconds, the car sped off, tires screeching, leaving behind the carnage he had created. This brazen carjacking not only gave him a getaway, it deepened the terror. Witnesses who saw him flee were left wondering, where will he strike next? For law enforcement, the nightmare had multiplied. It was no longer a contained scene. It was now a citywide manhunt. Back at Target, officers moved through the store aisle by aisle. "Clear," they shouted as frightened families emerged from hiding spots, closets, bathrooms, dressing rooms. One woman had been hiding under a clothing rack with her 2 children for nearly 10 minutes, whispering to keep them quiet. When police found them, she broke down in sobs. Outside, survivors gathered behind yellow police tape. Some clutched each other in silence. Others tried frantically to call loved ones who hadn't answered their phones. The parking lot, just an hour earlier a place of routine, was now littered with bloodstains and shattered glass. Reporters would later call it the most haunting crime scene in Austin in years. As investigators secured the scene, word spread quickly. Local news stations interrupted broadcasts. "We have breaking news from Austin. Reports of an active shooter at a Target store." Within minutes, the story was trending nationwide on social media. Posts showed shaky phone footage of people running, of flashing sirens, of families crying outside the store. Parents across Austin frantically texted children, "Are you safe? Stay inside." The city held its breath, waiting for answers. Who was the shooter? Where was he now? How many were dead? The uncertainty added to the fear. In just over 1 hour, a normal shopping trip had transformed into tragedy. 3 lives were gone. Dozens scarred forever. And a killer was on the loose. But this was only the beginning of the story. Because in the hours and days that followed, the manhunt, the investigation, and the search for justice would reveal much more, not only about Ethan Nieneker, but about the fragility of safety in America's most ordinary places. The moment police confirmed the shooter had fled, Austin transformed into a city on edge. Highway signs lit up with urgent warnings, "Armed suspect at large, avoid area." Helicopters circled overhead, their spotlights scanning the streets. Law enforcement agencies across Texas were put on alert. The name Ethan Blaine Nieneker began circulating through police radios, paired with a chilling description: armed, dangerous, unpredictable. Every gas station, every roadside diner, every quiet neighborhood street was now a potential hiding spot. Inside the command center, officers pieced together the little they knew. Ethan had stolen a car. He had just killed 3 innocent people. He showed no signs of stopping. While police scrambled, survivors of the Target shooting were giving statements. One young man described crawling behind parked cars to escape. He said, "I could hear him, the gunshots. They echoed. I didn't know where he was. I thought, that's it, I'm dead." A mother of 2 told reporters through tears how an employee had pushed her children into a stockroom before locking the door. "That worker saved us," she said. These voices, raw and shaken, painted the picture of terror better than any police report could. And they added urgency to the manhunt, because every retelling reminded the city that a killer was still roaming free. Detectives traced Ethan's escape route. The stolen car was found abandoned on the edge of the city. Its doors left open, engine still running. Inside, investigators discovered nothing but fingerprints, confirming what they already feared: Ethan had slipped further away. Cameras from nearby businesses captured glimpses: a blurry figure walking quickly down the street, a man crossing through a gas station lot. Each clue painted the image of someone methodical, deliberate, as if Ethan knew how to disappear in plain sight. And the question began to form: was this rampage random, or had it been planned for something larger? By nightfall, vigils had already begun. Strangers gathered outside the Target, candles flickering in the Texas heat. A pile of flowers, teddy bears, and handwritten notes grew at the edge of the parking lot. Some wept quietly. Others hugged strangers, united in grief. One sign read, "For Rosa, for Adam, for Astrid, we will not forget." On social media, hashtags surged: #AustinStrong, #TargetTragedy, #Justice for Astrid. The story was no longer just a local nightmare. It was a national tragedy. For the people of Austin, the fear was real. Until Ethan was caught, every parent hesitated before sending their child to school, every shopper glanced nervously over their shoulder, every sound of a car door or a loud bang triggered fresh panic. The city was holding its breath. As the manhunt intensified, police faced a chilling possibility. If Ethan had killed 3 people in broad daylight without hesitation, what would he do next if cornered? The nightmare wasn't over. In fact, for many, it felt like it had just begun. As Austin slept uneasily, investigators worked through the night. Ethan's name surfaced in federal databases. He had no serious criminal record, no violent past. But small red flags appeared: minor run-ins, unstable behavior noted by acquaintances, a growing sense of resentment toward the world. Detectives sifted through his digital footprint: social media posts filled with bitterness, private messages hinting at anger and alienation. One post in particular caught their attention. Weeks before the shooting, Ethan had written cryptically, "No one listens until you make them." To police, it was more than a clue. It was a window into the mind of a man who had just shattered a community. The FBI joined the case, assembling a psychological profile. They painted Ethan as a disconnected drifter, someone isolated, carrying deep grievances against society. Not a man with a political statement or terrorist agenda, but a man whose rage had boiled into something catastrophic. Experts warned, this type of offender doesn't stop on their own. They escalate until someone intervenes. This chilling assessment added weight to the urgency. If Ethan wasn't found quickly, the tragedy at Target might not be his last act. By the next morning, Austin woke up to a new reality. Schools increased security. Police cars patrolled shopping centers. Businesses hesitated to open their doors. Ordinary routines, buying groceries, pumping gas, walking into a store, suddenly carried a shadow of fear. Parents held their children a little tighter. Strangers nodded to each other in solidarity, silently asking the same question: could it happen again today? News anchors spoke somberly, their words replaying the horror: 3 dead. A city in mourning. A killer still on the loose. The tragedy captured national attention. Major outlets like CNN, The New York Times, and NBC carried the story. Headlines read: Texas manhunt underway after target shooting leaves 3 dead. Austin on lockdown, suspect flees after mass shooting. Across the country, communities were gripped by both sorrow and fear. The randomness of the attack hit hardest, because if it could happen in Austin, it could happen anywhere. Talk shows debated the familiar questions: gun laws, mental health, missed warning signs. But for Austin, it wasn't politics. It was pain. As day 1 came to a close, 3 families were preparing for funerals. Rosa, the loving mother who only wanted a simple shopping trip. Adam, a husband whose final act was protecting his wife. Astrid, a young employee who had her whole future ahead. Their names echoed at vigils, in prayers, on posters. They became the faces of a tragedy that would not fade quickly. And as for Ethan Blaine Nieneker, he was still out there. Somewhere beyond the city limits, watching, waiting, planning his next move. For Austin, for Texas, and for America, the nightmare was far from over. In our next episode, we follow the desperate manhunt, the near misses, the terrifying close calls, and the shocking discoveries about Ethan's state of mind that will make you question whether this nightmare could have been stopped before it ever began. This is just the beginning.